Hello everybody, and welcome to this lunchtime lecture from our librarian. My name's, for those of you that don't know me, my name's Margaret Shield and I'm the Provost here at the University of Melbourne. And it gives me great pleasure, as always, to be at something hosted by the library. And many of you will have heard me say how much I love the library, and I continue to love it after 18 months. And I should also point out that we're meeting on the land of the Wurundjeri people and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. And one of the reasons I love the library is because we have a wonderful librarian, and Philip, not only has he done a wonderful job in the 5 years that he's been here, just under 5 years, I think, since with the library itself. We're very fortunate that he's really connected into both the national and the international sort of library community and scholarly information community. And unfortunately, you will see some photos of our recent trip to England. I'm not sure about that, Philip, where I certainly had the opportunity to witness that firsthand as he interacted with librarians at the University College London and Oxford. And we're clearly, truly fortunate to have someone of Philip's calibre who's able to network us into that community so that we can hear about what's happening nationally and internationally. And it is a very busy space in terms of what's changing, the demands on both the publishers, on the librarians, on our scholars, and the popularity of libraries with our students, that creates a very rich environment and a very complex environment. And I'm hoping that Philip will enlighten us about some of those key issues, and the fact that you're all here, I think, gives evidence to the importance of these issues. So over to you, Philip.
Thank you very much, Margaret. So it's not quite holiday snaps, but that you will see some familiar people as we go through. So today what I'm planning to do is to follow some themes that have come through both our trip, but also through and the institutions that we visited, and you can see the names of the institutions up on the screen. And it was also salutary, given the focus on institutional rankings, to see that we were pretty much, there were some that are a bit ahead of us and some that are at rankings that we would aspire to maybe fill their shoes. But also it was some of my content is coming from a variety of other sources. And it was also interesting that, particularly around University College London, and I can commend to you a recent article by our Vice-Chancellor, Glyn Davis, in the latest issue of Meanjin, where he talks about our background as an institution. And there's some, particularly came out to me through that paper, our connections with University College London, which is because it was, like us, set up as a secular university. Also, during my trip, I also managed to visit Open University Library in Milton Keynes briefly. One of the reasons for my trip was that I'm on the board of Archive, which is some of you may know, is the physics preprint server from its earlier life, and that is now hosted by Cornell University, and I'm a member of that board, and they hosted that meeting in New York City. In London with the Provost, we also visited the Wellcome Trust, and that was through some links with the Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences. And also we had a meeting with Dr. David Prosser, who's been here and spoken at the university before. David formerly worked with SPARC, the Open Access organisation, but now he is the Director of Research Libraries UK. So in our discussions with him, we were able to get quite a good overview about what's happening across the board in RL UK, which are primarily the Russell Group, university libraries and the national libraries. I also visited Ithaca RNS, which is a not-for-profit organisation with Mellon Foundation funding in New York, and they're the group that are running the survey that we're doing of researchers at the moment. And so it was very useful just as we were tying up that. There's 5 group of 8 universities that are running this survey concurrently at the moment, and we'll be able to triangulate the data that comes from that survey with an annual survey that's done of faculty across the US, and also through Research Libraries UK, they also conducted the same survey in the UK. So it was interesting to also to catch up with Roger at Ithaca RNS. And some of my thinking at the moment is also informed much more closer to home, because this is the time of the year where I do my visits around all the units of the library, something like 20 separate meetings that I've attended with our groups of staff. And so it's been a great catch-up for me and to hear some great stories, and that also is also influencing some of my comments today. Also, around those meetings, we're looking at the IFLA, which is the International Federation of Library Associations. They've recently published a trends document, and some of that will flavour my presentation today. And also I had the pleasure just late last week to meet Lucy Burgess, who is the head of content strategy at the British Library, and she is a bright and interesting speaker, and I had the opportunity to have a one-on-one with her, so some of her recommendations and ideas flavour my presentation today. I did want to share this image with you because this is very much a beautiful holiday snap, although it was a work holiday snap. Margaret didn't get to University of British Columbia with me, but it's in such a wonderful setting and wonderful water views. It is a very, very similar institution to us as well. It's set in Vancouver on that west coast, so you get that very much west coast look and feel coming through. And of course we have close links with UBC through the Universitas 21 group, and we're connected at very many levels from our 2 Vice-Chancellors down. So to some extent I felt like I was one of the last people to visit UBC. What I'd like to talk about first is the changes that I'm seeing around strategy and performance, and in particular I thought I would get our friend, who is Dr. Paul Erris, who is no stranger to the university and who has spoken here before, to speak instead of me.
The Library Strategy is being launched formally at the Library Services Staff Conference here in UCL on the 4th of August. It's a very important document for us and for UCL because it sets out what the library is going to be doing in the next 4 years. It's a very exciting time to be here because the strategy identifies lots of new areas into which the library can move. The background is that the Provost has issued a green paper, soon to be a white paper, which sets out the principles which UCL should follow in the way it develops and grows in the coming years. The challenge for us in the library and for the planning team who have constructed the library strategy is to see how those principles should be applied to library and information services. UCL has set us a challenge. They have asked us to identify what the library needs to do in the next 4 years to make it one of the 10 best research libraries in the world. And that's the context in which the strategy has been produced. We've identified 5 key performance areas with goals in each of these areas that we need to achieve in order to answer the exam question that UCL has set us: what do we need to do to be one of the 10 best research libraries in the world? The key performance areas are these: student experience, research support, space management, healthcare support, widening participation, and social inclusion. The details for all the goals that we've set in each of these areas are on the library web pages under the strategy section, and I encourage you to go and look at those documents in order to familiarise yourself with what we're trying to achieve. Let me say something about one of the key performance areas with which I'm particularly closely involved, and that is space management. The UCL master plan for the Bloomsbury campus will deliver a fantastic vision for the library in the coming years, because we will consolidate in the Wilkins building the main and the science library together. And on the ground floor of this building, what we will do is provide hundreds of IT-enabled social working spaces in the cloisters and in the rooms adjoining the cloisters. We know from our discussions with students that this is the type of provision that they want, alongside traditional quiet study spaces, in order to pursue their research and their project work. Of course, we can be quietly satisfied that the origin of the idea for social learning spaces in UCL actually does come from the library, from the learning laboratory that we installed in the ground floor of the DMS Watson building. The UCL master plan acknowledges that this has been a tremendous success, and so is cascading that vision around the whole of UCL, in the Wilkins building, and in the new faculty hubs that will also be created. I'm very pleased that the UCL Library Services strategy is being launched here in August at the UCL Staff Conference for the library. I look forward to working with colleagues both in the library and around UCL to deliver this very exciting vision that UCL has identified for us and is supporting us in achieving. But let me remind you what the exam question is that we've been set. What do we need to do in the next 4 years to make UCL Library Services one of the 10 best research libraries in the world? The strategy identifies what we need to do, and I look forward to working with you all to achieve it.
So I think you'll agree that UCL's strategy is somewhat very similar to our own here, and it was to some extent interesting for me to see that we're obviously very much on the same page as UCL. What did surprise me was that in the 2 years since I last visited the major university libraries in the UK, that there is a much stronger focus on strategy. To hear Paul talking about, we want, and it sort of links to rankings, I suppose, not just rankings about universities, but he's also saying that they want UCL Library to be in the top 10 research libraries in the world. And this was quite a change from when I was there 2 years ago. The other changes that I noticed in this sort of space also was that an increased focus on quality. And just as here in Australia, that we've put a lot of effort into that we've done a lot of surveys over the years and benchmarked ourselves across the other universities. This is also a growing trend that I noticed quite clearly compared to 2 years ago. And in particular, for example, at the Bodleian, the University of Oxford, for the first time ever, they've appointed a position which they call an assessment librarian, which is very similar to the planning role that we have here within the library. And obviously you can see at UCL a very strong focus on strategy. And I guess we also could say that the key performance areas that they're looking at UCL are almost identical to ours, and in fact fairly similar to the headings that I'm using today. With the difference that they've particularly picked out support for healthcare. And those of you that know UCL know that it is very heavily dominated by a very, very strong and world-class medical school. But again, you know, that is an area that we have something very much in common with UCL. Just now talking a bit more about support for research, and as I've been going around, I've been really quite chuffed by the success of our research impact services across the library. And in particular, this is very strong links between what's happening in the library and supporting the research at Melbourne strategy. where one of those particular strands of that is around attracting, supporting and developing excellent people. And on the academic side of the house, this is where I think we are doing well. But also one of the interesting things is that as I went around these other research libraries, that they also are seeing the importance of this and putting resources and effort behind it. Digitisation, of course, is another success story here at the university. It's something that even our own Vice-Chancellor is very interested in and has visited the University Digitisation Centre a couple of times. This is certainly a trend right through our similar libraries around the world. And also linked to this, at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, they've been working and been very gracious with their time and ideas in supporting us around our repository upgrade that we're working on at the moment to DSpace, and they've again using very similar technologies and have been a great help to us. And of course, visiting the Digitisation Centre at UBC was very much like visiting our own centre. They also have some interesting and wacky staff members who are good fun to talk to, and they make their life a little bit more interesting and put lots of things on the wall, just as our staff do in the Digitisation Centre. And if you can't read it, the name on the great big guillotine where they're chopping up books to digitise them is called the Discoverer. And I also quite like this poster that they had on the wall as well. And of course, one of the other activities that we got up to when Margaret and I were in the UK was we visited Professor Germaine Greer and had a chance to look at the archive firsthand. I think originally we thought that we were getting 150. I think Germaine's told us that we've got getting 180 filing cabinet drawers. But the other thing that really interested me and also bore out some of the advice that we'd had from Dr. Katrina Dean, our university archivist, is that the way that Germaine has documented her research is a very wonderful level of documentation, that she is a world-class scholar, and that all of her areas of academic pursuit, from Shakespeare to medieval women writers to medieval women artists, some work that she's currently doing on contemporary women artists, etc., right through to the work on her rainforests and her quite detailed knowledge of things like botany and frogs and birds and all these sorts of things is incredibly well documented. And it's going to be an absolute pleasure for us to get our hands on the archive. And we're all very pleased to make the announcement last week that we are acquiring the Germaine Greer archive here at the University of Melbourne. It's been a long process, and a number of us, it's all been under wraps, of course, but we are now obviously at a stage where we've been able to go public. Also in the area of research, I'll draw attention to home for research collections. And I had the pleasure of visiting University of Manchester, and in a short while I'll show you the Alan Gilbert Learning Commons, but the other side of the coin at Manchester is that they have had for a long time the John Rylands Library, which is an amazing building, and this is their home for rare and special collections. The interesting thing about their site here at John Rylands, of course, is that they've had to marry the old with the new. And so you can see the brickwork at the back of the building, and they've added modern facilities on the back. Also because being a Victorian building, it's very difficult. There were no lifts or those sorts of things. So Manchester has a purpose-built home for their rare and special material. But as those of you who have heard my lectures before, the one project that we've been keeping a very close eye on is at the University of Oxford, and the new Bodleian Library is currently being transformed to create the Western Library. And this is the view from inside the Western Library of the Sheldonian Theatre and the old Bodleian, and in the foreground on the left is the Clarendon building, which formerly was the home of Oxford University Press, but is now, I suppose, the office of the University Librarian. They've done, we've been following this project very closely. It's a very expensive project, but has had an incredible amount of philanthropy to support it. This room, I think, Margaret, is going to be the map room. It's got a lovely panelled ceiling, and one of the other aspects is that they've taken out and put back in a lot of the original 1930s features of the building. We did have a hard hat tour.
This is not good for you.
And Professor Ian Anderson took Margaret to to Western Australia earlier, and he said to Margaret, "Oh, Philip won't be able to match this. You know, you've got to wear a hard hat over there." Well, in fact, we've matched this because in Oxford we had to wear not only a hard hat, but we had to wear these special boots, and we had to wear the goggles as well. So I think we might have come out on top. But one of the things about the project, the Western Library, is that, for example, it has space for 500 people at launches and events in the Blackwell Hall, a theatre for about over 100 seats in the library. And the thing that really struck me is that the hard work of Dr. Sarah Thomas, who has been Bodley's librarian for about the last 6 or 7 years, has been to increase the philanthropic support. And one of the things that they've done, which is very similar to our aspirations in this space, is to create spaces for visiting scholars from around the world. They have 10 offices and they will have 10 fellowships, funded fellowships, where researchers will be able to come. They'll have an office of their own right in the centre of the building with access to all the amazing resources. And one of the things that we really liked at the Western Building was also that they've used the hoardings for the building work, and they've had A to Z of different treasures from their collections. So Margaret chose this queen to stand in front of to have her photo taken. And then the other thing is where this is also another example, going back to University College London. This is on Gower Street, and this building, which is right on the right-hand side as you enter University College London, is a building that they're hoping they will also be able to repurpose as their home for research and cultural collections as well. And then just to round up this section on support for research and partnerships with research, I want to just briefly talk about some examples of things that are changing. And if you can remember, I think my first lecture 4.5 years ago, I drew attention to the Digital Public Library of America. And this is really quite an interesting project and it's really developed a lot, and I'd recommend that you have a look at it. It is basically a way that all the public libraries in America are contributing content. They have direct access to local sources, and this is basically, in one regard, a portal for students and teachers and scholars and the general public to find these amazing resources. But it is also a platform where people can share their own digital cultural heritage with the rest of the world. And also it's part of their advocacy that they want to see the role of public libraries to continue through being able to share their resources with the whole of the country and, in fact, the whole of the world. Research Space is an interesting project at the British Museum, and it's to support collaborative internet research and information sharing and web applications. And it is a whole lot of collaboration tools, internet facilities and data management and analysis tools that are all pulled together in one place, and that's why they call it research space. And the British Museum's own collections are also part of this portal, and there's over 2 million objects. And these sort of examples are saying to me that the world has changed a lot, even in the 4.5 years that I've been here, and that there's a lot of these new collaborative projects which are able to share on, web scale, vast resources. And I guess it starts to make me think, well, where do we sit in this sort of space? And the final example, which is one that Paul Eris, I think, is quite involved with, is involved with a lot of European digitisation projects. And this Europeana project, which is sort of similar to what I described in the Digital Public Library of America, but instead what it's doing is pulling the resources of a lot of European countries together. You can choose what language that you look at this portal in. And then finally, I just draw your attention to this ancestry.com, and why I'm raising this one is that our colleagues in the University Archives recently attended the Australian Society of Archivists conference, where they had a guest speaker from ancestry.com. It's a really interesting case study because it is a commercial information industry provider, but in fact they harvest a lot of freely available information that is from within libraries, and then serve it up. But the interesting point that Gavin McCarthy shared with me was that this business has about a £500 million turnover, of which round about 200 million is spent on running IT, which is the fundamental of keeping this business up and running. And the other interesting thing is that they spend 100 million on marketing. And I guess the question that I ask myself is, these are in some respects quasi-competitors to us. They're definitely key players in the information game. And I guess when I look at our budgets and see that we're perhaps not spending anything like those sums on IT or on marketing, it sort of makes me wonder what the future is going to hold for us. But let's change tack quickly now to teaching and learning. And some of you that we've had discussions around the IFLA Trend Report know that one of the trends that has been drawn to our attention is the rapid global expansion in online education resources, which will make learning opportunities more abundant, cheaper, and more accessible. And there's the participation and equity issues coming through here. And also what the Trend Report says is that online education will democratise and disrupt global learning, and that there will be an increased focus on lifelong learning and more recognition of non-formal and informal learning. And of course this is timely because of the work that we've been doing here at the University of Melbourne. And as I'm sure most of you know, that this has been the year of MOOCs for us. And we have launched 7 MOOCs. And these slides I'm drawing on slides from both Jenny Ellis and our colleagues Gregor Kennedy and Deb Jones in Learning Environments. And one of the really interesting things for me has been, I'll just go back actually, because at the moment, the latest stats are that this is a business, Coursera, that we're a partner with, has only been going for a bit over a year. April 2012. So, yep, so a year and a half. There are now 5.5 million Courserans. They are running 538 courses, and they have 107 partners, which include ourselves, and also in the context of my trip, the universities at Manchester and British Columbia. And one of the developments that particularly interested me that I found out about and has now been announced since is they've ventured into MOOCs at University of British Columbia. And this is, again, there's a reference to this at the end of my slides, some references for you to go and have a look at afterwards. But they're running, just launched a subject called M101, which is called Digital Knowledge. And it comprises of 2 units, which are part of the Master of Ed Tech, and it's got 130,000 registrants. And the themes that come through this, and this is really about digital literacy skills, and it's I think has implications for the university as a whole, and it's run as a partnership between the library and their Faculty of Education in developing it. But the 3 streams are mining, meeting and mobilising digital information. So a very interesting development there. And then just today, I was alerted by our colleagues Trong and Bernard in the Law Library about SPOCs. And these have just been announced at Harvard, which are small private online courses. You may not be able to see very clearly from here, but the participation rates, so I think we're now around about 350,000 Coursera students at the University of Melbourne from these 7 MOOCs. And while some people say that if you look towards the last week or so that a lot of the students have dropped away, a lot of people are doing this not necessarily because they want to complete the assessment tasks, but because they want to learn. And of course, one of the other benefits of having data like this and a lot other richer data is that we're finding out a lot about how people are learning in this online environment. And it was largely as an experiment that we participated and supported the project. And I just want to quickly say, because some of you in the audience won't know, that we were indeed fortunate to be able to assign 1 librarian to each of the 7 MOOCs up front. And I think to some extent that was facilitated by the structure and the fact that we work alongside our colleagues in learning environments. And the majority of our work has been around copyright clearances. And this is a quote from Jenny Ellis, who says, "In some cases, the academics underestimated the complexity of sorting content for MOOCs." And this has led to an incredible amount of work in the Copyright Office in negotiating licenses, but also one of the learnings from this is that we've had to educate the publishers about what MOOCs are along the way, which has added to the time involved. Some other learnings has been that we've underestimated some of the workloads. Some good contributions, and this is an area where librarians excel in things like citation styles being agreed and implemented, and even quality control of those sorts of things. Obviously, compiling reading lists and being able to source open access versions, because of course MOOCs are free, and so you can't charge for the resources. And also some other involvement of our staff have been around monitoring the social media from the participants in the courses and contributing if they're in our areas of expertise. And also most recently we hosted our first meetup. So for those who don't know, a meetup is people that are doing these online courses actually decide they want to meet and meet real people that are doing the same course. And so we hosted an event where the teachers and some of the local students came together, but it was also filmed and broadcast. And this is another quote from Jenny, which says that the MOOCs model is a disruptive one for libraries, defying many of the ways in which libraries traditionally support learning and teaching using subscription or print resources and scholarly information literacy guidance. There is no escaping the fundamental questions about whether the library can add value in this enterprise or experience. But one of the exciting things from my perspective is that we have some incredibly rich resources here at the University of Melbourne that are copyright free, and that they can actually add an added dimension to what we're delivering with the MOOCs. And this is obviously something that we're doing a lot of work in our regular courses, but it was a great pleasure that we were able to include these slavery letters in the, I think, the Wealth of Nations MOOCs. And that was, I think, a great opportunity to contribute and have different types of content, but also to really expose all the treasures that we have here. When we were in London, we also did have a brief opportunity, Margaret and I, to catch up with Professor Malcolm Gillies, who's known to some of you here. He's a world scholar on Percy Grainger and a supporter of our Grainger Museum. He's the Vice-Chancellor at London Met University. And he, in his column in the very recent Times Higher Ed, actually observed about some of the flow-ons from online course delivery, and in particular around data analytics. And he says that they're at risk of blurring the boundaries. What he was talking about is one of the good things about online courses is that, of course, learning analytics can tell us a lot more about who's using what and the ways that they learn. Malcolm was reporting that he'd just had some interaction with people from CourseSmart, who's a provider of digital e-textbooks, and they have what they call an engagement index, whereby they can tell who's using what, and in particular it helps them to know what works and doesn't work as learning resources and learning materials. However, what he also said, and so they can revise at very short notice, if a chapter's not being used, they will go and do more work on it to make it obviously more useful or attractive. But as Malcolm points out, teachers can also see who's reading or who's not reading in their class, which is also good because we can identify students who are at risk or not perhaps delivering. But there are obviously some issues around some of the Big Brother types of surveillance, I suppose, that go with this. And so Malcolm does raise the question, does a low engagement index lead to negative perceptions of a student's performance by teachers? And then he also says, and if a student does well, but they have a low engagement index, does that mean that we treat their assignments with greater suspicion? So just some interesting, I suppose, broader social issues and questions. And these next two slides, I acknowledge that Craig Patterson from our team in the ERC put these together for a presentation. But again, these are some of the issues that the world, I suppose, is looking at around online delivery, not just of courses, but of online services by librarians. And you can see the chat there, which has again been a big success for the library, and I think has become our third biggest, like a library in its own right. And similarly, in terms of some of the information literacy questions, because it's a much more complex world, I quite liked this slide that Craig put together for us. So moving along now, I just want to talk about library as place, and in particular show you some of the images of places that we visited. This is those that know University College London. This is the original medical school building called the Cruciform, and it's undergoing a massive redevelopment. And you can see why it's called the Cruciform building. This is a floor plan that was pasted up to the wall in the building site. And yet again, you can see that some people were seen in hard hats and fluorescent vests, but no goggles or shoes at UCL. But an amazing redevelopment, which is forming. It's bigger than from the way I see it, to what we've got in the Brainless, but again is going to be a fundamental part of their delivery of services. And while Margaret was speaking at Universities UK, I took the opportunity to go and visit the Alan Gilbert, that is Alan Gilbert, who was formerly here, the Learning Commons, which is a concept that I was with the librarian at Manchester 6 years ago when she got the phone call from Alan to say, I need a proposal from you by Monday morning to develop this Learning Commons place. And it's really a wonderful place, and you could go and have a look at the website. There's lots of amazing photos. But just one little thing I wanted to share with you. Purple is the colour at Manchester. And this is these are some purpose-built modern armchairs that they've had built, which are really popular. But these purple ones have got a special place because Manchester a bit unlike us, has had 25 Nobel laureates. And so they've put the names of their Nobel laureates on the back of these purple chairs. And what they say to the students from the library is that you too can be a Nobel laureate. You're studying at one of the best universities in the world. And so sit in a chair with one of your heroes' names on. And I thought it was quite good that this chair has got William Lawrence Bragg's name on it, because if you don't know, he is actually Australian born and was a very famous British physicist and X-ray crystallographer. And he was responsible for Bragg's law of X-ray diffraction, I think, and he won the Nobel Prize in physics. But it's
also claimed by Adelaide.
Yes, he came from Adelaide, but I think in the list that I looked at, he didn't seem to have studied there. He went to St Peter's College in Adelaide, but he did his work at Cambridge and awarded the Nobel Prize. But it's truly, I won't go through a lot of photos, but they have done a lot of student art, which they've incorporated into the design and you know, printed on glass and on fabric and all sorts of things. And again, it's quite a restful place, but it's also got a lot of privacy and a lot of space for quiet and reflective learning. And I also quite like this. They had a whole lot of quotes that they, again, printed on a wall, similar to what we've done in the Baillieu behind the spiral staircase. And this is Nancy Rothwell, who is the Vice-Chancellor at Manchester, and she says, follow your head, but use your head, but follow your heart. And then moving to another part of the world, this is UBC and what they call the Irving K. Barber Learning Centre. And this is actually the original library that you can see in the middle, but they've wrapped around it a modern building, and that you actually, once you're inside, you don't necessarily know that you're in the old or the new part. And it's quite a large space, but it does incorporate, this is the old original library, which is part of it, but also similar to some of the wonderful spaces that we have in the Baillieu with double-storied. This is a modern part of that building, but again, some wonderful reflective spaces. And this is for Ian Anderson. Even this is, I suppose, because, you know, I think I beat him on taking Margaret to more hard hats. But this is at UBC, their First Nations Longhouse Library, which is, you know, celebrating the Indigenous people of that area. And then lastly, on this sort of space theme, you'll recall that in the past I've spoken about the work that Oxford's done with their book storage facility. And in fact, what they did was that they closed a lot of separate book storage spaces all around Oxford and consolidated them into one single place south of Oxford. And they actually have a really fast and rapid turnaround of service, which I would like us to have something similar to. But the benefit of doing this is because they only have to go from one place, and even though it's something like 25 miles away, with 2 deliveries a day, it's really, really speedy. At UBC, they have a sort of strategy that's a bit more like ours. And also I was interested to see their automated storage and retrieval system that we've looked at and are interested in incorporating into some of our future redevelopments. And in fact, what they've got is a sort of a mixed model. So they have obviously a lot of material on shelves. They have the ASRS, which is in the Learning Commons space. But they are also building a remote site for remote storage as well, a mixed model, although it will be on the edge of the campus. And then just coming to a close and thinking about new ways of working, one of the changes that I was particularly interested to learn about at University of Manchester was that they've totally restructured, and unlike what we do here, is that they've moved away from the concept of subject librarians, and they now have teams where they're either working in the learning and teaching area, they're working in the research area, or they have another group which is sort of more like account managers who do the liaison with faculties. It's quite a different model. It's only a new model. They do acknowledge that there are some transition issues for them to manage, particularly in some disciplines compared to others, but an interesting development nonetheless. And I've also mentioned that obviously with MOOCs there's been some learning challenges for all of us as we've implemented them and supported them, but also this is a foretaste for us of some of the different challenges that we will have around supporting the university as we move from MOOCs to having a lot more of a presence in online course delivery. I just briefly want to talk in closing about engagement. And you'll be aware that we have the Piranesi exhibition coming early next year, and this is a joint project with the State Library. And as in the past, where they've had major relationships with both the Bodleian and Cambridge, the next collaboration is with us. And we'll be drawing on our mutual collections of Piranesi to have a major exhibition down at State Library featuring a large amount of our prints in that exhibition. But the interesting thing around engagement, and again we see, and I saw similar stories as we were travelling around, is that not only do you have the exhibition, but as we're doing next year, we're having a public lecture in association with the launch of the exhibition, but also we're having a conference here at the university working closely with the Australian Institute of Art History and bringing some world-class academics to come and speak at that conference. And also we're working with the Ian Potter Museum of Art, who is doing a sideline exhibition which is called the Piranesi Effect. And they're going to be showing work of contemporary artists who have drawn on or drawn inspiration from Piranesi. And this is a cute little story, but with our special collections, you may or may not be aware that this Serum Breviary that we hold is actually a 2-volume work, and one volume is here with us and the other volume is at Oxford. So I've always had this vision or plan that I'd love to have a reuniting ceremony with them at some stage and put them together and let them become friends again. But we weren't able to do that this time, but I did take this slide with me and I showed it at Oxford. So they've been sort of reunited in a sort of a way. But in Oxford, we've had some great inspiration from them about what they've been doing in terms of merchandise and events. And Kylie Nichols won a scholarship to go there earlier this year, as well as the British Library, to investigate what they're doing there. So I won't say too much about them, but I will just say that the University of Manchester is also very interesting in this regard, particularly at the John Rylands Library. And they have been doing some amazing events, including, because as you saw the shape of the building and almost Gothic look of it, they have Harry Potter sleepovers in the museum. And they show the film, and they've been incredibly successful with a whole variety of children's events, as well as very scholarly activities that happen there. So much so that just recently the John Rylands Library won the Best Large Visitor Attraction in Manchester award. So it again says to me that we shouldn't just set our sights narrowly, and that the impact of some of these rare and special collections can have a marked impact on the city that we inhabit. And of course, everywhere we went in the libraries and universities of this type and calibre, there was a lot of talk about alumni and fundraising and campaigns. And just to finish off, I had seen this ceiling before in Oxford, but didn't realise that this is one of their early ways of acknowledging donors, because all those crests are actually from their various donors, and they'd incorporated them into the designs of their ceiling. So that was an early form of this type of acknowledgement of what donors can contribute. I've really just skimmed the surface, but I just wanted to give you a bit of a snapshot of some of the issues and ideas that were coming forward to me as I was going around. And there's some links that you might want to follow up and have a look at, particularly some of those online sites. But also, I think we've got a couple of minutes to field some questions or even observations or comments from any of you. So it's over to you. Thank you.